Hello, and welcome to a bit of a late night chat, really. I did mean to do this earlier, and I do apologise if I looked a little tired, but I ended up spending the day moving turf instead. And I wanted to get this done today because I wanted to run through it and check it before it goes up. So, this is the long-awaited long patrol on sloops. And why do sloops deserve their own long patrol before other things get them? Partially because of this book. Arnold Haig, Sloops, 1926-1946. It's a gorgeous book. Partially because I can. I like sloops. I consider them the forgotten ships in many ways of World War II and certainly of the interwar years. And there is a reason I'm wearing my Finland hat as well, but I'll explain that in a bit. Sloops are these little ships which go everywhere. They're doing everything. They're involved in every facet of the war. There is at no point in World War II that you can point to an operation and go, no sloops there. There is a reason why behind me there is a Black Swan class sloop design. I might well get that out. So, sloops, they're everywhere, but they're not in large numbers. They're not mass-produced, is often the thing that's put up them on. The other thing you hear about is, oh yes, the Royal Navy was ignoring small ships in the interwar period, and that's why they had to crash build the Flower-class corvettes. Well, it's a yes and no. Sloops are the smallest vessel built to full naval standards. Okay? So, why am I wearing a hat, and why am I talking about full naval standards? Naval standards are a level of naval architecture in terms of construction, in terms of how you design the structure, in terms of how you construct a vessel, in terms of what standards you do so. So, I love this hat. It's Finland. But it is, I have to admit, produced in Sweden. And I often think it's for this reason that it has proved not as well wearing as other hats, because I had this feeling this is a Swedish revenge on the Finnish. Commercial standards. I have this hat, which I also love, which was produced actually by a friend of mine. And they made sure everything was produced, in their words, if it wasn't as good as they could make it, it wasn't going to leave their shop. So that's military standards. That's naval standards. This is a perfectly good hat. It's fine. It's actually slightly thicker and has got a different back. So this is more a winter hat and this is more a summer one. There are differences. But they are the same age. One has a custom design which should have worn in various other things on here. One... Sloops are built to naval standards, and they are built during the interwar period. And they're building on a legacy, which I'll be getting into. So these are vessels which matter. but they're also test beds, as I'll be going through and explaining. And the corvette program of World War II, the frigate program of World War II, owes itself to the work done with sloops during the interwar period. Because rather than ignoring small vessels, rather than thinking they didn't matter, it was actually the reverse. The issue was, well, is it better to pick a design and churn out a lot, or to keep improving, developing the design year in, year out, and ordering in small enough numbers to keep the skills going, so you have the best template to develop from when you need to order a large number? Wow, to have a navy of sufficient size, you have such an option. I'm not sure even the Americans have that these days. Chinese certainly seem to. Right, so a little context. Sloop as a term originates in the 1700s. With the Royal Navy. Often referring to small vessels of single or double-masted construction. But these are really some of the smallest ships you can have. They are not just small, they are agile, but they are also cheap. In World War One, it was the Flower Class sloops which saved the convoy system. They were the convoy system. Without those ships, there wouldn't have been a convoy system. And as I'll be getting into the Flower Class, there actually are 5 subclasses. And if everything's gone to plan, they will have had a few short introductions. By the time this airs. Between 1928 and 1939, the Royal Navy ordered 51 sloops. Halcyon Class are technically minesweeping sloops, and if they're included, that number goes up to 73. So again, if we consider that between 1928 and 1939, over 11 years, they're ordering, well, 6.5 vessels a year, or 7 vessels every year, barring 4 of them. That is quite a large program. If you turned around to the modern Royal Navy and said you're going to buy 73 ships, yes, the smallest class of ship, but 73 of them over an 12-year period, where you're going to order 7 3 years in a row and then 6 in the 4th year, and repeat that 3 times over. They don't actually do it that way, but if that's what it averages out as, if you told the Royal Navy that, they would probably A, ask you where the money was coming from, and B, jump up and down for joy. Again, if you add in the minesweepers, which are built to sloop standards, the Bangor and Halcyon classes, it goes up to 202 or 197 taken delivery of during World War II. 34 pure sloops are ordered. So, why are they still building minesweepers to sloop standards? And why aren't they mass producing a whole load of sloops? Well, the trouble is, and if you go back to the hats, 1, custom job. Takes longer. Takes more time. Probably takes a few versions to get the doggies markings quite correct. Still not quite correct, but as close as they could get with the cartoon styling. in the nicest way, mass-produced. Commercial standards tend to make it quicker and easier to produce in volume. And that's the point. The reason they don't produce so many sloops in World War II? They're building corvettes, they're building frigates. Corvettes are built to pretty much commercial standards. Frigates, they're a halfway house, enhanced commercial standards. A far nicer way than saying watered down naval standards. So they're producing them to fill the role of the fighting sloop. But they're still producing sloops. Why? Well, mainly, of course, they are producing sloops of this class, the Black Swan class, which were possibly the best anti-submarine warfare vessels produced in World War II. Now, individually, there are ships which do better than the sloops, but pound for pound, as a collective, I don't think any class manages to beat them. It's just for assists, for total number of kills, all these things. Is that something to be proud of? Well, I'd say for a little class of ships it is. Okay? It's a world war. The fact that these things do so well when they are quite so small is pretty darn cool. Now, to unline this one, it is a rehash, to an extent, of a previous live and previous introduction videos, which I decided to go back and revisit now I'm better at graphics. And I am going to get onto the World War II ones. That's one of my plans for December. Hopefully after I've got my office set up. There's all sorts of ones I want to do once I've got my garden office set up and organised, because that's far better than recording in the current facilities I have. But I am going to remind you that 58 of the 73 were ordered in the tenure of Admiral Henderson, so expect him to be covered today. Now, sloops in the age of sail. You have HMS Pickle, which brings the news of the Battle of Trafalgar and Nelson's demise. Is a Bermuda sloop or a schooner? There is a debate. And there is HMS Seagull here, which is a brig sloop. You can see these are small ships, but these are very useful little ships. They are used for convoy duty. They are used for picket duty. They are used for, well, picket duty close inshore as part of the squadrons monitoring the blockades. They're used for running errands, for communications, for moving supplies. If the oceans are the arteries of navies and supplies at this point, these are the blood cells that move the oxygen around. So here's the Flower class. go, there's the mouse. I'm going to say goodbye for a second as I expand. So the Flower class of World War I. 120 vessels spread over 5 subclasses. Now, the subclasses are pretty darn interesting. They are the Acacia, the Azalea, the Arabis, which together account for around 72 Royal Navy and various other branches of the Royal Navy's vessels, and 8 for the French Navy. Two of them would actually be lost to mines in the Baltic Sea in 1919, but during World War I, I mean, there were nine British losses and 1 French losses in these ones. However, there are also 2 classes of Flower class sloops, the Abertacia and the Anchusa class, and yes, I am mangling Flower pronunciations. A total of 40 vessels, which were designed as submarine decoys or Q-ships with hidden guns and a mercantile marine appearance. Their whole purpose was to trick people, especially submarines. And they do pretty darn well. But we're going to start over with the beginning of it, the Acacia class, ordered in 1915, and that's what we're going to look at here, because this is, in many ways, what I call the template of the Royal Navy sloop force. 1,200 tons, so not particularly massive. About 80 metres overall length. A beam of roughly 10 metres. A draft of 3.7 metres. You're going to get used to hearing those figures. Propulsion was very interesting. Aimed to be 1,400 to 1,800 indicated horsepower. Actually to produce a top speed of 17 knots. Realistically, they required 2,200 horsepower to do so. Not 22,000 horsepower, indicated horsepower. Range 2,000 nautical miles at 15 knots, with a maximum load of 250 tons of coal, so these are not long-range vessels. Complement of 77 men, and I'm not even going to bother trying to list out their armament, because the amount of modifications these ships received is also beyond belief. There is one I've found an account written about, which I haven't found picture verification or other source verification of saying that it mounted 2 4-inch guns and 4 of the 3-pounder AA guns. And it was assigned to the East Coast convoys. So it could have done, but why it needed so many AA guns, I do not know, because it wasn't exactly a heavy AA environment in World War I. Might have been using them for other jobs, though, maybe anti-torpedo boat fire. It's really quite a cool system, and quite a cool little ship, but very basic, and it gets refined. So, we've now reached Supersonic Interwar, and this is part 2. Part 1's a bit of background, part 2 is treaties. It always has to be treaties, because the treaties have an impact. And at this point I would normally be showing you my books by John Jordan. But the thing is, with John Jordan's books, and I love them dearly, but the small ships don't get much of a mention, really. And there is a reason for that. The treaties were heavily focused on the large ships, which means there isn't much about it. Because everyone was worrying about the battleships. Everyone was thinking about the battleships. Well, here's the fact, a problem though. Well, trade in the 1930s, according to the Royal Navy. This is the trade the Royal Navy has to keep going. These are the vital lines of sea lines of communication, and that's not including all the telegraph cables strewn around the world. This is the economy the Royal Navy has to keep going. This is everything the Royal Navy thinks about the whole time. So it's necessary to think, for them to work, for it to be thought through. And it's also necessary for them to be present, and it's necessary for them to think about how they're going to keep it going in wartime. So whilst everyone is focusing on the headline-grabbing assets of battleships, aircraft carriers, cruisers, submarines, you can't afford to forget the smaller vessels. You can't afford to. When you've got this much, when you've got all of this, you can't afford to forget trade protection. You can't afford to forget economic warfare. And the suggestion that you would is basically isn't suggesting that admirals were stupid and ministers were idiotic. It's suggesting that they were willfully negligent, because it's how you understand the world. Now, arguably, one of the reasons why the Royal Navy is so bad at adopting a convoy system in the First World War is because, not that they've forgotten it, but they don't think it's actually practical to do so, because they don't think that you can they don't have the escorts, they don't have HASDIC or any other systems. They think they need to deal with submarines. And the entire basis of their strategy had been about blockade, had been about minefields and blocking the Germans in. And it took them a while to get to work it and not just see that this was a failing, this wasn't working, because the submarines were able to get past the blockade, but surface ships weren't. But then to analyze it and start producing a solution. And they eventually get a solution. They eventually come to the convoy system or return to the convoy system. But they don't forget those lessons. The staff officer who writes the papers which come up with, which provide a basis, an argument for convoys, is the person who's third Sea Lord, 1933 to 1939, Admiral Henderson. He has been Rear Admiral aircraft carriers. He has been all sorts of senior ranks. He's the staff officer. All sorts of senior officers. These are not men who are going to forget, and of course at this time they were all men. These are not men who are going to forget their duty, and they are not going to forget what they are supposed to be doing. It just isn't going to happen that way. So, this is the 1920 Washington Treaty, and I am going to have to expand this again for you to be able to read it. I do apologise, but it's worthwhile having here. Now, for starters, the standard displacement is defined, and please notice the first point. Standard displacement of a ship is the displacement of the ship complete, fully manned, engined, and equipped, ready for sea, including all armament and ammunition. Miscellaneous equipment, outfit provisions, and fresh water for crew. Miscellaneous stores and implements of every description that are intended to be carried in war. But without fuel or reserve feed water on board. You can all see how the Royal Navy managed to work that one out. Now, Also, please let's note context articles, Articles 22 and 23 of the Washington Treaty. 22. Whenever any contracting power shall become engaged in a war which, in its opinion, affects the naval defence of its national security, such power may, after notice to the other contracting powers, suspend for the period of hostilities its obligations under the present treaty, other than those under Articles 12, Articles 13, and Articles 17, provided that such power shall notify the other contracting powers that the emergency of such a character as to require such suspension. That's a get-out clause. And then there's Article 23. The present treaty shall remain in force until December the 31st, 1936. And in the case none of the contracting powers shall have given notice 2 years before that date of its intention to terminate the treaty, it shall continue in force until the expiration of 2 years from the date on which notice of termination shall be given by one of the contracting powers, whereupon the treaty shall terminate as regards all contracting powers. So, lots of get-out clauses. But, interesting enough in that treaty, there is no mention of small ships. Literally none. It's dissolved them. But here come the sloops. 1930 London Naval Treaty, Article 8. Subject to any special agreements which may submit them to limitation, the following vessels are exempt from limitation. Naval certificate bands are vessels of 600 tons, stand displacement and under. And just quickly go back, stand displacement, as we notice, the word ton in the present treaty, except in the expression metric tons, shall be understood to mean the ton of 2,240 pounds or 1,016 kilos. So that's 600 tons, or, and I'm doing some maths here. It's always a scary one. $69,600 kilos. Sorry, mouse went AWOL. Naval surface combatants exceeding 600 tons, but not exceeding 2,000 tons, stand displacement, provided they have none of the following characteristics. Mount a gun above 6.1 inch caliber. Mount more than 4 guns above 3 inch caliber. Are designed or fitted to launch torpedoes. Are designed for a speed greater than 20 knots. Theoretically, therefore, you could produce a vessel with 4 6-inch guns on it. Just mentally imagining a vessel with 2 refuser class turrets on it, and for 2,000 tons. I don't think it would have much space for engines. Better stick to a 4-inch gun. Can do so much more with it. Why no torpedoes? Well, that's to stop them being destroyers. And please note though, designed or fitted to launch torpedoes. Well, how can you say if a ship's been designed to be fitted for torpedoes or not? You can fit a fixed torpedo launcher onto anything. And are designed for a speed greater than 20 knots. Life happens. I didn't design this ship for 20 knots. I just gave it a very nice, more than 20 knots. I just gave it a very nice bow, a very nice engine, and the crew tinkered around with it. And what do you know? It's doing 25 knots. We'll get on to Singtown 1939 though later. Article 8 of 1939 continued. Naval service vessels not specifically built as fighting ships, which are employed on fleet duties, or as troop transports, or in some other way than as fighting ships, provided they have none of the following characteristics. Mount a gun above 6.1 inch. Mount more than 4 guns above 3 inch. Designed or fitted launch torpedoes are designed for a speed greater than 20 knots, are protected by armor plate, so it's gone further, are designed or fitted to launch mines, hence their use as minesweepers, which, by the way, is also pretty much the same gear at this time, which can also be used for launching mines, but we'll leave that on one side. And most of the Royal Navy ones can be fitted to lay mines. We'll leave that to one side as well. Are fitted to receive aircraft on board from the air, i.e. no one try and build an aircraft carrier for 2,000 tons. Please don't. It'll disturb us all. Mount more than 1 aircraft launching apparatus on the centerline, or 2, 1 on each broadside. Again, where are you going to fit them on a 2,000-ton ship? Let me rephrase that. Yes, I know other navies do try and do manage with destroyers to fit them, but still, so much more I'd like to use that space for. If fitted with any means of launching aircraft into the air, are designed or adapted to operate at sea more than 3 aircraft. I swear someone's thinking that they're talking about the TARDIS. So, first points are very straightforward. This is what applies to the Royal Navy sloops. Protected by armor plate. It's a small ship. You can have armor plate or you can have engines. Are designed or fitted to launch mines. Well, seeing as most Royal Navy ones do some work as mine layers at some point in their career, I don't think anyone takes any notice of that one. So this is Admiral Reginald Henderson. He's 3rd Sea Lord. He is given the task of designing a fleet to protect this, within the limitations of this, and this. So what does he come up with? Well, the Royal Navy's already building it. No need to reinvent the wheel. The sloop's already in production. But you need to make sure you start polishing that design. You need to make sure you are continuing a development. Because what are the sloops being justified largely for at this point? It's peacetime. Everyone's talking about a 10-year rule, when there's not going to be war for 10 years. Why are you building small ships whose only role, which can be built quickly, and whose only role in wartime is convoy escort? And who's going to challenge the mighty Royal Navy after the experience of First World War? No one. There's always people who like to come up with these phrases. It's interesting when they do. So, what does he do? Well, he's justifying the same way they always have. We need vessels for presence. We need vessels for yachts. We need vessels for anything else they can be used to justify them. The hydrography officers needs them. The hydrographers need them for their surveys of the ocean. We need these small ships to do this training mission, that training mission. Minesweeping. And you're probably sitting there going, that's an awful lot of communications vessels. Well, the Royal Navy has an awful lot of stations, which need communications. And in the pre-helicopter world, it was easier to justify. So where does sloops fit in the Royal Navy's operational doctrine? And I talk about this in many, many points. So like when I talk about Admiral Henderson, I talk about operational doctrine a lot when I talk about 1920s and 1930s, because it's important to understand the philosophy that overarches everything. And the operational doctrine is the philosophy. But, or operational philosophy, I'll get into one or the other. And of course we have Captain Brind of the Birmingham, HMS Birmingham, in a Tsingtao incident in 1939, which we'll be talking about later. And by that point, Admiral Harwood of the Battle River Plate fame. Where does sloops fit? And every time I do talk about this, I emphasize where the areas which the class of vessel I'm talking about fits. Well, they're about gathering information because they're turning up. Their image is an important reality. These smart-looking little ships wander around the world. They make the Royal Navy seem far more visible than it otherwise is. Because you cannot afford to have enough cruisers, enough battleships to be in every port in the world. And also it's expensive to keep them moving from point to point. And that means they're not doing training. And that means they're not where you need them to be. But you still need to be there. Because if you're not there, then you're not there. And if you're not there, people don't think you're going to be there. So you have a small ship turning up, going, hello, waving flag. We look smartly turned out. We are well crewed. Image and hull force. What are these small ships for? No, they're not going to go toe-to-toe with a battleship. If they were, they'd be outfitted with torpedoes and either submerge or very, very fast. Their job isn't to do that. Their job is to do the missions which go on all around the war fighting. In peacetime, that means their presence. They're showing up. They're melding relationships. They're making friends with people. They're providing duties and posts for junior officers to develop their skills and their leadership and their command abilities. Also, they're about task forces, not fleet. These will be critical vessels to task forces in convoys throughout World War II and anti-submarine warfare operations throughout World War II. That's not a fleet. That's a task force mentality. It's a what ships do we draw from the fleet to provide the operational task force? We're not talking about grouping everything together in a massive fleet battle. We're talking about this is this mission, we need these ships for it. It's a task force mentality. And most navies in the interwar period are moving towards this in one way or the other. So, the pre-London Treaty of Classes. We have the 24 class, which, guess how many were built? Yeah, 24. 1,320 tons, standard displacement, so a little bit heavier than our Flower class. Length 267 feet. About right. Beam 35 feet, a little bit wider, a little bit longer. Draft 10 feet 6 inches, a little bit deeper. Speed 17 knots. Range, whatever could be got out of 260 tons of coal. That's 10 more tons. HMS Mary Hampton has a particularly interesting career. She gets turned into HMS Herald, a survey ship, and then IJN Hale, because the IJN managed to capture her. Well, refloat her. Silvio, HMS Silvio, later HMAS Morosby, a Soviet ship. That's 2 of the class. Interesting enough, and this is a point I think I've made before, but I really do want to make it again. We call so many of our bases in Britain for the Royal Navy stone frigates, and there was an interesting question posed on Discord the other day as to why our naval bases are commissioned as ships. It's a tradition, but it's also to do with certain aspects of naval discipline being maintained. So they are commissioned, quite a lot of bases are described as stone frigates. They actually use sloop names. So realistically, they should actually be called stone sloops, which sounds a lot nicer off the tongue than stone frigate. A stone sloop. The Bridgewater class. HMS Bridgewater and HMS Sandwich. Built even lighter. They're built in 1927 to 29, when the Royal Navy still got a load of World War I vessels around. They're working out how to use them. They're working out what they're going to do with them. They're also working out... It's under Washington Treaty times. They've got far more latitude and space for building cruisers, for building destroyer numbers. The only things really limited are the battleships and aircraft carriers. This is the period at which even the Japanese are managing to trying to build an aircraft carrier for less than 10,000 tons. But again, you'll notice, length 250 feet, beam 34 feet, draft 10 foot 6 inches, speed 17 knots. That seems to be a recurring theme going on here. Whilst in the China Squadron, Bridgewater took part in a detailed survey of the South China Sea. And HMS Sandwich got caught up in the 1932 Shanghai incident, where she basically played, well, supporting act and lead supporting act to HMS Cornwall, a county-class cruiser, in a repeat, sort of a forebear of the Tsingtao incident, where HMS Birmingham, town-class cruiser, goes in with a sloop as backup. It's a standard history. And speaking of Tsingtao, here is HMS Folkestone of the Hastings Class, which is the vessel which does go in with HMS Birmingham into Tsingtao in 1939, and I'm going to get into that now, but first of all I'm going to look at these ships. 1,045 tons, standard displacement, length 250 feet, beam 34 feet 1 inch, draft 12 foot 6 inches. Built 1929-1930, 4 for the Royal Navy, 1 for the Royal Indian Navy. Now, let's consider. Bridgewater class, 1,045 tons, 250 feet long, 1,045 tons, 250 feet long, beam 34 foot 1 inch, 34 foot 1 inch, draft 10 foot 6 inch, draft 12 foot 6 inch, speed 16 knots. They are very, they're deeper for a reason, okay? And the deeper draft is to make them more stable. Technically, speed, limited top speed of 16 knots. Okay. During the Tsingtao incident of 1939, January, the SS Vincent de Paul is captured by, let's call them Coast Guard, of the Japanese operating in China. She's taken to Tsingtao, where she's moored under the guns of 3 Ashigara class cruisers. the Royal Navy rushes HMS Birmingham and HMS of Town Class Cruiser and HMS Folkestone up there. Now, they're coming from an exercise they were conducting in the Philippines area. That's a long way to go up to Tsingtao, or modern Qingdao. What's even more interesting is they get there so quickly. The remark is often made that SS Vincent de Paul, which wasn't exactly the fastest moving vessel in the world, is only just dropped anchor getting into the harbour when Birmingham is pulling in, followed closely by Folkestone. That's a very long way, and it's in a very short time. I am incredibly doubtful that Folkestone was maxing out at 16 knots only for that journey. I'm fairly sure she was managing to find an extra... Well, based on my understanding of the route and the timings it must have taken from the alerts going through, 3 to 4 knots would seem not unusual. 5 to 6 knots, considering the sea conditions and what was prevailing, would seem more likely because of the currents, etc. they would have had to fight with and the wind and other issues. So that means 22 knots. Well, designed for 16, but apparently they can go faster. Now, I can't confirm that. There is... Why? I could confirm that, but unfortunately I haven't been able to visit the archives where I could find that confirmation, because the accounts are as they are from various sources. The person who was keeping the time log of when the alerts for about the SS Vincent de Paul go to the Royal Navy, and therefore the orders will follow from that. But Birmingham picks up on the alerts and starts warming itself up before, because it hears the messages going back and forth. And presumably Folkestone, which is in our group, also gets those same sort of does that. They're all in the personal papers, I hope, because they're not in the archives. So I hope they're in the National Archives in Kew. I hope they're in the personal papers of the consulate senior clerk, senior official, whose papers are all stored in Oxford. At the Bodleian. And I haven't managed to get there yet, but I will get there. Well, talking about it, HMS Scarborough was on the North American and the West Indies Squadron. She's stationed in Bermuda, often operated around Newfoundland as a sort of government diplomatic asset. I actually have a good example of that duties written down here. She took the Prime Minister, Ramsay MacDonald, and his daughter for a trip, and also hosted Canadian Senator Crediman MacArthur when the Royal Navy was trying to win his support for naval spending, of course, which he actually agreed with. Halcyon Class. Now, interesting enough, this class are slightly bigger. It's grown. It's 1929 to 31. These have grown to 1,105 tons. Speed still at 16 knots, though. This class was supposed to be for the Persian Gulf. That's pretty much what they were aiming for. Shoreham, Fowey, Bideford, Rochester, Falmouth, Milford, Weston and Dundee. Rochester I'll be getting into later. Falmouth served on the China Station. She's a good example of them. Functions as a Commander-in-Chief's yacht. And including in her career path includes a young Commander Frederick Johnny Walker, who's most famous, of course, for being commanding a pack of Black Swans in World War II and being an anti-submarine warfare ace. These ships were very much used as a way for young officers to get early command experience. Good officers would be aimed for them. So, the post-London treaties, their ships. And you'll notice immediately there has been a gap in construction. 1929 to 31, and they sort of stopped building for a bit. They're negotiating, things are going on. 1933, new third Sea Lord, Admiral Henderson. And the Grimsby Class come along. Grimsby, Leith, Lowestoft, Wellington, Londonderry, Deptford, Aberdeen, Fleetwood, Yarra, Swan, Parramatta, Warango and Indus. Please note, HMS Wellington is now HQS Wellington and sits on London and is a beautifully painted white ship. If you want to go see what a sloop looks like, they are a classic example of a sloop. And these are 1,006 tons standard displacement, length 266 feet 3 inches, beam 36 feet, draft 10 feet, speed 16.5 knots. Didn't stay that way. Also, just one little point. In that white colouring with buff funnel, HQS Wellington, as she now is, does look really, really close to what they would have looked like during the interwar period when they were on the China Station. One of these vessels was actually the vessel not taken to Tsingtao, so they took the older vessel rather than the new one. Why? I have a theory on this one. They weren't much better armed, and frankly they all moved their guns around so much. This is why I'm not listing guns for these vessels. They changed during World War II rapidly, but in peacetime period you might find them mounting 1 gun, 2 guns, 3 guns. They might have taken their guns off to be turned into yachts, they might be in minesweeper mode, they might be in mine layer mode, they can be in all sorts of things very quickly, and they would be adapted incredibly quickly. The equipment for adapting them was literally sitting in harbour in places like Singapore, in places like Hong Kong, and they would go in, be fitted, come out. This doesn't mean that during World War II they didn't get full refits when someone came home before they went to do escort duty. They did. Some would have Aztec fitted, some would have other things fitted. But there was a lot of equipment sitting out there waiting for them, and it could be pre-positioned for these little ships. But onto my theory of why Lowestoft wasn't taken. Lowestoft was the newest ship, but still quite an experienced crew. But if you take both sloops, it does look like you're turning up en masse, and you also limit your options. But more importantly, Lowestoft, because of her design, is actually quicker to convert to mine layer than Folkestone. So send Lowestoft to Singapore, where she can prepare defences if that needs to be, because they're going in to face off against the Japanese. Yes, the Royal Navy is used to man and they're used to these scenarios. Yes, they're used to dealing with it, but they don't want us to consider it something which they're going to be run of the mill, and they're certainly not going to take every precaution. So that's why Lowestoft's not taken, in my theory. Halcyon Class. A lot of these vessels are built, 21 of them. But notable ones, Seagull, one of my favourites. Halcyon, Gossamer, Bramble. Bramble is, of course, sunk by the Admiral Hipper. 825 tons stand displacement. Length 281 feet. Beam 35 feet. Draft 8 foot 3 inches. And speed 16 knots. They are adaptations of the Grimsby Class. So, you can say the Royal Navy is ordering 13 Grimsby Class. But the reality is they're ordering 34 ships. A big lump. 34 ships. But no, they're not building small ships. They're not interested in small ships. Kingfisher Class. Also ordered in between 1933 and 1939. There are 9 made for the RN. You have in 3 batches of 3. They are attempts to try and make it as small as possible. I would say these are the test beds for World War II anti-submarine warfare trawlers. Basically, this is the Royal Navy going, how low can we build a practical warship? I also love the way they're given their range. 160 tons worth of oil. That's how far our range is. As long as we have oil, we'll keep going. And they were very economical to run. I mean, literally, if this was your car today, you would be going, I'm a Prius of the car world. Well, probably not quite a Prius, but, you know. Fiat 500. Hastings Class. 1,190 tons. Now, HMS Enchantress was supposed to be HMS Bittern, but she instead became Enchantress because she became the Admiralty yacht. So Bittern is actually the final one of the class. Speed has now grown to 18.75 knots. Now, here's the other thing. Why are you sending out a long-range escort, convoy escort, that's what you're designing these ships are as best you can, as a unmanned, unarmed, well, unmanned, crewed but unarmed survey ship to the China station? Because you need to have very accurate maps of what's going on in the South China Sea, of what is going on with Japan at this moment in the Far East. You need to know. She's how you find out. Yes, she's doing the survey work, but while she's doing the survey work, she's also listening and keeping an eye on islands which you can't keep sending warships around because it looks bad. It looks paranoid. But a survey ship wandering around, that's not paranoid. It's just you getting a survey. Egret Class, growing bigger now. And faster. These were modified Bitterns. And it's developing more and more the convoy ideas. You can see more and more the form of what they're going to be going for coming through. Speed officially is 19.25 knots. Beautiful, that. And then we have the Black Swan class. 8 RN and 4 RIN. Royal Indian Navy. Flamingo, Black Swan, Ern, Ibis, Wimbury, Wild Goose, Woodpecker, Wren, Sutledge, Jumna, Narborough, and Godovry. Interesting thing, HMS Flamingo becomes Graf Spee post-Second World War. They displace 1,105 tons. So they're not getting anywhere close to the 2,000 tons. Length is 281 feet, beam 35 feet, draft 8 foot 3 inches, speed 16 knots. What the Royal Navy's managing to achieve with a little over 1,000 tons, you imagine what they could achieve with 2,000 tons, if they wanted to. But there's a reason they've left 900 tons out of this one. If you build ships of this size, you're practicing for what you can build in quite a large, far more yards than you can build if you're building ships of 2,000 tons. Plus, it stops them being compared to your destroyer program. The modified class of Black Swans are a lion's share of those sloops built during World War II, and they are critical. This is the class which HMS Starling is a famously a member of. This is the class which does so much in World War II for anti-submarine warfare. But again, weaponry-wise, things get modified. 3 double 4-inch guns, quite often. 160 up to depth charges. Often officially less, but unofficially I've got output accounts. Anti-submarine warfare mortars when they could get them, radars, all sorts of things. There are some interesting careers. So, here's a summary. And there is a reason I've put here HMS Rochester as an example. I'm going to disappear for quickly while I talk through her career. HMS Rochester, a Shoreham class vessel. So she was operating in the Persian Gulf when World War II was declared. Please note her picture down below. Turns to UK with convoy SL-32 in December 1939. Is refitted to full war abilities at Humber. Rochester was assigned to the 2nd Escort Division in March 1940, patrolling the western approaches for the Battle of the Atlantic. She assists in the attack on U-94 whilst escorting OB-218, then transfers to the 37th Escort Group in July, and is fitted with Type 271 destroyer-grade radar. Participates in the sinking of U-204 whilst escorting HG-74. Rochester was then transferred to the 43rd Escort Group, participated in the sinking of U-82, then U-213, and then takes part in Torch. North Africa. Sinks U-135 as part of the 39th Escort Group. Then takes part in D-Day as part of the 41st Escort Group. And then is converted to a navigation training school vessel, which she will serve in the role of till 1951. Very useful small ship. Very, very useful small ship. But there's a reason I've put up there from the philosophy of operations, of the operational doctrine, the peacetime requirements of the Royal Navy and the peacetime needs. Sloops were built to be able to modify for war, and as you can see from Rochester's career, very useful. 1,000 tons of ship and it does all that. But they're also built for the peacetime. Much more in ways for the peacetime. If we're building them today, you could just imagine the noises you'd be getting. The people going, but they're so underarmed, they're so this, they're so that. Yes, they are. Their job isn't to go and fight fleet actions. In fact, a large chunk of your Navy's role is not to go and fight a fleet action. It might be to be part of an escort group, of a convoy, to not try and keep away from a fleet action anyways. It might be to be minesweepers. It might be to be presence in parts of the world which aren't actually at war, in order to say you're still there, so that someone else doesn't move in while your back's turned, like has happened with large chunks of the world while the Western powers were preoccupied with Iraq and Afghanistan. Where there's a power vacuum, other nations are prepared to move in. They always are. It's sensible politics for them. These ships are how you don't have that vacuum. Or at least that vacuum might not be so apparent for a little bit longer. Where to go for more information about sloops? Well, especially about Tsingtao, Global Maritime History. I have articles and videos on here, including some excellent ones with Daniel Freeman. For more dense, but a massively more detailed read, please go to this book, Sloops. It's brilliant, but it is massively dense. I do love, though, its realism as it goes through. Yeah. They're being fitted with 3 double 4-inch guns. The moment the Royal Navy is doing that, the Royal Navy is admitting that we're no longer bothering the treaty. That's HMS Bitten in Nemesis during the Central Norway campaign. As you can see, she's been hit rather badly and she won't be recovered. But she was in there. She was helping. That's not a battle role. That's a convoy escort role. That's getting troops into Namsos. That's helping with ground forces. That's an important fighting role, which you need a ship there for, a little ship there for. But she doesn't need the accoutrements of a fleet warfare vessel for doing that. It's important to remember what sloops were for. In wartime, anti-submarine warfare. In peacetime, they were presence. In the modern Royal Navy, we would perhaps consider, especially the new batch, well, they're called the Batch 2 River class patrol vessels. They should really be sloops in their definition, because they are the present ships. And yes, you will find videos on here of me saying I would like them slightly outgunned. And that's not because I want them to become a first-class war-fighting vessel. I really don't. They really shouldn't be. But it's because I think they need a little bit more oomph for the presence mission they're going to be used for. Because I'm fairly sure they're going to be forward-based in some pretty... Now, I wouldn't say high-risk parts of the world, especially not solo. But I would say high-tension. And sometimes it's good to have a little bit more oomph to go if you need it. I would go back to the example of the sloops. In a world where people had battleships with 15 and 16-inch guns on, aircraft carriers, cruisers with 8-inch guns, 6-inch guns wandering around the world, lots of them, people building Tribal Class destroyers with 8 4.7-inch guns on, 6 4-inch guns in 3 double mounts. Would have seemed minuscule. Most of these ships had single 4-inch guns. 3 of them. But they had them. It's as much for crew morale as it is for their actual combat capability. but it also gives them just enough firepower that they can do these things if they need to. So where else to find me? Where else to find out more information about this? Twitter? Globe Maritime History? Patreon, where you can find all the slides. I love Patreon. Mainly because it provides me with my book money. And I do love my books. So thank you to everyone for listening. Thank you to everyone for watching. Hope you enjoyed. What else have we got coming up in recently? October, Brew Ships 22, Patron 9, Thursday 22nd, the ships that Fisher scrapped, suggested by Jeff Granard. Sunday 25th, Brew Ships 23, Pen and Sword books to review. And Monday 27th, Patron 8, The Treaty of London, 1930, by Daniel Freeman. And Thursday 29th, Amphibian Class Cruisers. It's all fun. Anyway, thank you. I hope you've enjoyed this. Sloops are complicated little ships in terms of balancing their capabilities versus their limitations. I'd say if you're looking for a similar level of operational ability, you're looking at what the Danish produce with their Stanflex class. I'd say the Nudd Rasmussen class is the closest we have to modern day sloop as they were designed by the Royal Navy in the 1920s and 1930s. And that's certainly the level of capability which I would be looking at if I was designing a modern sloop for the Royal Navy. With some codicils. But also, more importantly, all this work shows, and all this effort that the Royal Navy puts into sloops really does demonstrate that no one was forgetting anti-submarine warfare. No one was forgetting the convoys of the escort war. But when we do ask the Royal Navy to stop developing ships and to start building them in vast numbers, the Black Swans class are excellent. But they are in many ways the final evolution of a program which has been going since 1928. So 11 years, 12 years it takes. And they're being ordered. Multiple classes. Developed, refined, hull, developed, refined, armaments profile, developed and refined. And then you go, right then. We now need to mass produce. So we get a commercial hull. This is what we need to fit in. This is the equipment we need. Boom. Which commercial hull can take that equipment? Which commercial machinery can support that level of capability? And you churn it out. It's also what produces the frigate. It's a similar idea. What level of commercial hull can produce this capability? It's very sensible. We've worked out what we need for their operations. This is what we need. So what can fit that in, and then it's decided for us. By the logical way around. You're starting off with the capability. You've practiced the role. You've tested the role. You know what you need. I need to be able to fit this in it. So find me the best hull available that can fit that in it. That's the Corvette program. That is the Flower Class Corvette program. And I would argue that it is not a surprise that they are called the Flower Class in World War II, as the Flower Class sloops were in World War I. Thank you, and as I said earlier, hope you enjoyed.